US lawmakers have agreed in the last hour to raise a deal to raise the country's debt limit and hopefully reboot the government. Now, though, it'll have to be approved by both Republicans and the Democrats, infighting between whom brought the world's richest nation to the brink of default. Let's go to Washington when RT's in this scenario there to try and make some more sense of this from us. So the headline is they've put together a deal at last, at the last minute. They think they can probably vote through. When's that vote likely to take place and what was in that deal?
It's expected that that vote will take place sometime throughout Wednesday. Senate leaders seem very confident that it will pass right through the Senate. The problem we might run into is in the House of Representatives, and we're hearing reports that, in fact, the House might vote first to ensure that this deal does get through. They seem to think that that will make the approval more speedily, approved and getting through. This is a deal that they've been pushing for 2 weeks or so, 16 days. The government shut down, 800,000 workers not working, lots of businesses losing money. And there's been a lot of pressure on these leaders to get something done. Now, the tentative deal would allow for the Treasury to continue borrowing. It would keep the U.S. government up and running until January 15th and allow it to continue borrowing until February 7th. According to the Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid, this would allow for lawmakers to come up with some kind of permanent budget solution to not have these kind of crises halt the government here in Washington, and of course have the rest of the world standing and waiting to see what would happen, whether or not they would be thrust into recession. So they seem very confident that this deal will get through. There are some skeptics that we're seeing, especially on social media, that's saying that you should expect anything from some of the House Republicans. So we'll have to wait and see to confirm completely whether or not this shutdown has come to an end.
Well, in fact, there's some comment as well now here. President Obama has welcomed this potential deal. He's urging the Senate to push it through, the House to push it through, and that's the latest from there. Of course, he's been highly blamed for this from some quarters, isn't he? Notwithstanding everything you've just said and the temporary relief this will give to January, of course, the bleak midwinter, we could be facing all this again, couldn't we?
Absolutely. It's essentially just kicking the can down the road. The problem is going to come up again. The U.S. lives on credit. This is a problem. Can it keep borrowing? We almost came down to the wire. And like I'm saying, it's still not confirmed that this shutdown is over on the U.S. defaulting on its 17 trillion or so U.S. dollars in debt. That is just going to keep going. They will continue to borrow as they try to come up with some kind of more permanent solution to this budget, to not have this kind of chaos take over the U.S. Capitol, the government, and affect so many millions of people, not just in America, but around the world. The question now is, if this deal does go through, default is avoided for a couple of months or so, what happens to the U.S. reputation already that it's letting it gone this far? You have the rest of the world. You had financial institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, warning for the U.S. to be responsible. So although Harry Reid, he said in his speech when he announced this so-called deal that the world was watching Washington this week, and that's for sure. I don't know if a lot of critics would agree that they see now that Washington is responsible. I think that that is going to be debated over the next couple of months. You have countries like China who have already announced that they're going to be looking at a new way to do business with the United States, and it's not going to be the dollar that they're going to try to allow themselves to fall back on. So this, whether or not they have a deal or not, things have changed, certainly. The world has been watching, and I don't know if, like I said, a lot of world leaders, trade partners, and financial experts would agree that the rest of the world, that this is proof, I should say, that the United States is responsible. All
right, Nissa, thanks for the update there. It's going to be a busy afternoon. We'll let you get back to it, keeping across all the latest wires as they're coming through, and I'm sure we've got a lot more people to talk to throughout the course of the day as well. Well, talking of which, Jim Rogers, author of Street Smarts, Adventures on the Road and in the Markets, points out the deal severely damages America's credibility.
We've been kicking the can down the road for 60 years in America. How do you think we got this much debt? We're the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. We've got to do something about it. Every year that goes by, we go deeper and deeper into debt. You see what's happening in Washington right now? Same old charade. Everything is okay now. We've solved the problem, and a year or two or three from now, the debt will be up this much higher, and we'll be back at the same place we are now, only worse because the debt will be worse. And countries that are lending to America have really, you know that Russia, China, a few other countries are starting to say, we've got to do something else. We cannot keep putting money into U.S. dollars and into U.S. government bonds because this thing is going to end badly. I'm not the only one who knows that. Many other countries are starting to say we have to find an alternative to the U.S. dollar because these guys are not solving their problems.
Well, what this crisis has done is spark a global re-evaluation of the dollar as the world's reserve currency. Nations such as China say that the Washington standoff shows that there has to be an alternative currency. But equity strategist and economist Peter Westin told us it may not be that simple.
To actually de-Americanize, as they're calling it, is going to be, if it's going to happen, a very slow process. But given that we see time and time again these political crises appear in the US, I think there would be more calls for a sort of trying to reduce dependency on America in the same way as America has been trying to reduce dependency on the Middle East for its oil. But it has to be a very slow and sort of gradual process.
Let's get more on this potential deal that's been struck with Ivan Ilin, director of the Centre on Peace and Liberty at the Independent Institute, joining us live now. Hi there. No matter what you say about it, for the bad, let's look at the good, focus on that. Probably better to kick the can down the road than to default in the next few days, no?
Yes, well, I have some sympathy with the Tea Party people because we do have a $16.9 trillion debt, and we have a big budget deficits, and that what they're trying to do, I think, is to reduce the government spending, and that's a good thing. But I'm not sure that this is the way to do it because government spending increases when the government shut down because they have to shut it down and start it up again. And also, if they would go over this debt ceiling limit and not renew it, you'd pay a lot more in interest payments. And I think it does slowly erode the credibility of the United States. Now, that will happen slowly, as was just said, but I think really whether the dollar will remain the reserve currency is if the U.S. has a good economy and gets its debt and deficits down, and I think that's important, and I think the Tea Party is helping out with that. It's just that I think their tactics in this case have backfired on them.
But the way they're going at the moment, I mean, the big elephant in the room is how long can it go on? You're piling debt on top of debt. OK, most countries work with a heck of a lot of debt in the back pockets, but this surely is not sustainable very much longer, is it? What is the picture?
No, I don't think it is. And unfortunately, the United States might be better if it didn't have the reserve currency. It wouldn't have that crutch to fall back on. I think that's one of the problems. It's not the only problem. The real problem is overspending. And I think we've really got to get that down. And, you know, this is what the Tea Party Republicans are trying to do. And I think they should be congratulated for that. But these constant government shutdown crises and debt limit crises, I think that does undermine the market and undermine the economy. And I think other tools should be used rather than that to try to get the budget down.
How seriously has this undermined America's standing around the world?
I think to some extent. I think you can overstate that because the real problem with the reserve currency is where do you go if you don't use the dollar? And right now there's really no alternative. There's no real alternative to treasury bills. America is not like Argentina in the fact that it can't pay its debt. It's just that it won't pay its debt temporarily if this debt limit is not raised. So that's sort of a technical default, but not a real default. And I think the real problem that the U.S. has, and this is a significant problem, is the $16.9, nearly $17 trillion debt and continuing budget deficits. And that's really, those deficits have to go back, and we have to start paying down the debt, or we're going to end up like Greece.
A final one-word answer, yes or no. Will this get through the vote, do you think, this latest plan?
Well, I think it probably will, because I think Boehner has said he will not breach the debt. You know, he will not. You know,
I'll take it as a yes, then, Ivan.
But they'll have to have. Yes, they'll have to have Democratic votes to do it.
Excellent. Thanks, sir. Nice to see you on the programme. Ivan Ilin there, Director of the Centre for Peace and Liberty at the Independent Institute. Thanks, sir.